Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show here on the Transverse Network. I'm your host, Emily. I'm very excited tonight to welcome my guest, Michaela Waltz. Michaela is one of the people that are involved in the Trans Pride Pittsburgh event that we're participating in later this year in October. So I'm very excited to have her on tonight. Let me get into her bio real quick. A painter, sculptor, graphic designer, and musician, as well as a trans rights activist, Michaela's sculpture work has been made into resin statues and vinyl toys, some of which you'll see in just a minute behind her. She was nominated for a World Fantasy Award for her work in the small press. Michaela first started taking agency for her gender identity in the mid-1980s. But by the late 80s, she was told by the medical establishment that she wasn't trans. A little bit of gatekeeping, isn't that fun? So she paved her own path until a time when the standards changed. At that point, she started medical transition immediately and moved down this path that she's on now. Everybody, welcome to the show, Michaela.
Hello, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. It's wonderful to be working with you on Trans Pride Pittsburgh. I'm very excited about that. And I'm also very excited about getting into your story tonight.
I'm happy to share it.
Awesome. Just so we've got the record straight for everybody, how do you identify and what are your pronouns?
I am a woman and my pronouns are she, her.
Jumping into your story with my favorite question, how did you choose your name?
That's actually when I initially chose my name, I saw it in the credits of a TV show I was watching. I believe it was Bones, and the actress that played the forensic artist in the show's name was Michaela. And I said, hey, I like that name. And so I said, okay, that's what I'm going with. But oddly, just last week, I was visiting a local center and talking with somebody there and introduced myself to them. And we were chatting and stuff. And then when I was leaving, she said to me that, I'm always going to remember your name because I was a big fan, had a big crush on Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And it's like, well, okay. I remember I had a big crush on Jane Seymour, the actress, from when I first saw her in like the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad back in the early 70s. But it turned out that the Dr. Quinn first name was Michaela also, and I had completely forgotten that. And so like, yeah, this is really cool. That's an extra depth of context for my name.
Mm-hmm.
So that really, that was really kind of a nice addition to that just literally it was last week where I was reminded of that.
You made that connection to your past. I love that. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And then diving more into your story.
Yes.
When did you first realize that you were trans, that was the term that applied to you? We'll start there sort of in the middle of the story, and then we'll jump back to what led up to that.
Well, if we're defining the term transgender in relationship to me, that was about 6 years ago where that kind of fit into place. Prior to that, there's another term that's bandied about amongst various people that uses the trans part but a different suffix.
Transvestite?
It's been so long I can't even remember.
Is it transvestite?
Transvestite, which it's like after. I couldn't really identify with that term, so I kind of, created my own term, which I only recently discovered other people were using too at the same time, which was gender fuck. And, I adopted that as a descriptor for myself somewhere around 1990. Because, shortly before that time period, I was told by a therapist that, nah, you're not trans because of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, I know I'm not like those people. So, what am I? So I just created my own sort of gender identity at the time that I just kind of adopted that kept me going for a very, very long time.
And then at some point, the general understanding of it changed, and you found yourself back well within the trans bubble, right?
I had no idea. I mean, at the time I was told I wasn't trans, we were under the Standards of Care 3, which was all of 7 pages long. And I don't know if you've ever read Standards of Care 7, but it's, I think, 150, 200 pages long. and the one that's coming up, which we just spent a bunch of time reviewing, is currently at 350 pages. It'll be reduced from that one in the final version, but 7 pages is kind of not a lot of information to work with. So it was very easy for gatekeeping to happen.
And for people to fall through the cracks, it seems, yeah.
Yeah. And, it's like I was living in an area where they had one of the oldest gender clinics in the country. I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they have a clinic that's now over 50 years old. They've been doing, gender care there since the 1960s. And it's like, if any place was going to happen that I could have transitioned, it would have been there. But at the time, I didn't fit the criteria. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered that there were friends I made later in life that either lied their way through the system because they knew what they wanted, or went underground to get their care and DIY'd it for a long time. So they, oh, those were all options. I was at the time very trusting of the medical world, and said, well, you're the professional, you must know, right? And not realizing that there was other paths out there. It was before the internet. There was scant little information out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were definitely in the early days and kind of the wild, wild west of transgenderism.
Let's not use that word.
It's one of those. It's like, how else do you categorize it? But I understand that's the funny thing with terms in the LGBTQ space, right? Is that B plus, how much it changes, and how for people in a certain era, certain things are really bad words. And
right.
Later on, I was in a conversation with somebody who does not identify as queer because queer was such a slur back in their time. And now it's something that we freely adopt, it seems, in the community a lot of the time.
Frequently, yes, it is very much the case. Yeah, terms they're fluid. They're very fluid, much like our genders.
So, yeah, looking back at your youth, once you were able to identify yourself as trans and finally fit into the definition of that as transgender, what were the clues that you were able to trace back to your youth? The sort of the breadcrumbs that would eventually lead you to where you were?
I think the earliest definite memory I have was we had, when I was a kid, we had bags of clothes that were being donated to, I don't know, Goodwill or some such thing that my mom was kind of collecting from the neighborhood. And in one of those bags, I found a bikini that one of the neighborhood girls had decided to part with. And I went and tried it on, and it was just like, this is what I should be able to wear. And this I would have had to been in junior high school, so 7th or 8th grade maybe. And I remember at that time in junior high school wearing, on very rare occasion, wearing some women's underwear to school. And that was very risky at that time period. This was somewhere around 75, 76, 77.
Wow. And I mean, there were some times where when I was young, I would, venture out in public and things like that. Were
Mhm.
you just terrified of
Oh
people
God,
realizing or understand or knowing?
yes, but felt like it was something. It's like I need to wear this stuff,
Mhm.
and and I did, and it didn't happen very often because the terror was very, very strong in those instances. But I did that, and it wasn't until I ended up getting my first job where I started actually having cash and could actually start shopping and buying some few items for myself when in high school, and carefully hid them in the house.
Mhm.
Relished those times where I could actually venture into the world of me.
Mhm. Did you have so my understanding of it from my own perspective
Mhm.
was that it was a kink, it was some kind of fetish
Oh yeah.
that I had, and so there was a ton of sexual shame around it.
Oh,
Did you experience that as well?
tons of that. And even though I did not grow up in a highly religious household, I have a lot of religious trauma associated with that too. It's like, why did I always have this feeling of being a sinner and going to hell for doing some things that were just very much a part of who I was?
Mm-hmm.
It just seems so wrong to me. And um, there was a lot of baggage to unpack over the years. And by the time I moved out of my parents' house into my own um, life, it was just like, it's like, this is just who I am, and I need to do. I need to be able to explore this part of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about for you, but for me, from when I kind of started exploring that and realizing that that there was something there, that I had that interest or the need, whatever I could have described it as at the time, it would be probably 25 or almost 30 years until I came to the realization that you did, that it was a part of me and something that once I realized it was a part of me, it was just who I was. That helped
Hmm.
me frame it in a way where I could learn to accept it and then move on. Okay, this is just what I am. What
Hmm.
now? And that really helped me. Did you sort of go through that similar experience?
It's I kind of found this middle ground relatively soon after I ventured out into the world on my own,
Mm,
right? Where I was kind of being able to, I guess, in modern language, I could almost say I was living a non-binary life, but only because that was the only option available to me. I don't think I ever actually identified as non-binary, but I took advantage of um, that sort of androgynous place. And also, you have to remember, this was mid 1980s. The punk and new wave scene was out there. There was gender messing around on all the music videos everywhere. It was really, really easy to. And I was in a hotbed of punk culture in this country, in Minneapolis. It was just like, it was easy to be this kind of androgynous, punky little. I guess in modern, you can turn. No, I was probably fairly twinky.
mm,
you know,
easy. Yeah.
we didn't have that term back then, but I was just kind of this little androgynous person out there, and
Well, and it's funny, even when I came out in the early, I think, yeah, I guess it would be the early aughts, or in the tens and teens there. When I started experimenting with makeup and then eventually came out full time at work, the people were like, "Oh, we just thought you were in a rock band or something because of the eyeliner and the makeup." And it's like, it's funny how that trope,
yeah.
that understanding of that sort of gender bending that your era helped kind of
Hmm.
usher in has really still stayed with everybody, of like, well, if you're playing with gender, it's because you're in a rock band.
Yeah.
Interesting that has held on as the belief?
My first girlfriend back in the mid 80s, I think was roughly 86. We'll just pick 86 as a date. Got me into, wearing makeup. And because I think she's still a friend today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and she's been extremely supportive, but she's the one that first introduced me into actually wearing makeup and going out, as opposed to sneaking some and trying it in the dark moments of around the house. It's like, okay, here I can start to explore these things, um, and so that I started wearing makeup in the mid '80s, and at the time, that same time period, I got both of my ears pierced, which was unheard of for a guy to get both ears pierced back then. It was like the adage of right is wrong was very strong,
Yeah.
especially with, in the middle of the AIDS crisis going on. You didn't want to be associated with, you know, the stereotypes that were being bandied about of who was getting HIV and AIDS. It was just like, yeah, that's just like, this is bullshit. Um,
Well, yeah, I remember that, and maybe it was just my perspective, but I kind of remember it changing at one point. It was gay to have two earrings, and it was like, no, it was gay to have one if it was on the right side or whatever. I just remember that, like, it was sort of like, well, which is it now?
yeah,
That's very funny. So, what was
yeah.
it that provided the catalyst for you 6 years ago to actually start moving forward and taking steps down this path?
I had, completely kind of blocked off that whole line of inquiry for years, because while I was told this by professionals, they know what they're talking about. So I just kind of did this my own sort of path for decades until I stumbled across, and I forget the name of the quiz. I'm sure you've seen it out there on the internet. It's this long 80, 100 question quiz to kind of figure out what your gender identity is. It's filled with lots of stereotypes and whatnot in it. But the result that came out of that, me taking that, was that the suggestions was, some gender therapy might do you good, as would a partial transition. And I said, what is this partial transition?
Huh.
And so that immediately got me, digging around, and I found the gender program at the University of Minnesota, called them, and got put on a waiting list because, of course, therapists always have waiting lists until you get to see somebody. And they said, yeah, it'll be about, X amount of time. I waited that amount of time, maybe a little bit longer, and called them and said, yep, no, it looks like you're coming up real quick on the list. Waited a little longer, called back in. They said, oh, we tried to call you. And said, well, no, you didn't. But it's like, all right, we have a new batch of therapists starting at soon, and they got me in with one, and so that was all kind of exciting. It was like, then it was like a 3-month wait for the actual appointment to happen, which was just crazy. And it's like, so I took this quiz in like the late winter, early spring, and it wasn't until September that year that I actually got into to see my therapist at the time. And we did the initial intake, bunch of questions and stuff. The next appointment, it had the little diagnosis that she had come up with, which had the gender dysphoria on it. That was a Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Friday, I was full time. So
Wow.
That's all it took.
So a little bit of transition turned into a lot of transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'd already been living so much as myself in those previous 30 years that it was just like, all right, I just needed somebody to say it was okay.
And what has the difference been for you between those two periods where you were essentially living your life, but still in a way pre-transition, pre anything medical and
Certainly medical, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It was one of the most affirming things I'd ever done. It was just like all of a sudden I could actually be me. I could start having conversations with people out of the blue, stopping, in line at the checkout counter, just randomly being able to talk to somebody that I'd never met before, or, just like having just casual conversations where, it's like I was all of a sudden comfortable in myself in a way that I'd never experienced, because there was always this sort of disconnect.
Yeah. So was there a period during this where you had to kind of come to terms with the fact of being transgender, or had you been so long in that process to get there that when you were there, it was just like, okay, this is it, we're going, this is great?
It was an easy step. It was, that week where I had my appointment on the Monday, got the diagnosis. This is the quick little rundown. Monday I had the therapy appointment, saw the gender diagnosis, or the gender dysphoria diagnosis. Tuesday, I'm doing a lot of mental processing. Wednesday, I sit down with my now ex-wife and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is the week that would have been, well, it was our wedding anniversary was at the end of that week, right? And so we had planned on taking a vacation, going up from Minneapolis up to Duluth, Minnesota, which is a couple-hour drive up on Lake Superior. So we had we were going to go up there on Friday. The day before, my brother and his wife were coming into town to visit some friends, and I was going to go pick them up at the airport. So my ex and I sit down and talk. She's supportive. She's unsure about a number of things, like whether, she's comfortable with me on HRT or whatnot. But, she's very supportive. And she was always very supportive. It's just, we all changed, so we ended up splitting up. But that's not a story for this. She was wonderfully supportive and a fantastic. The next morning, my brother and his wife are coming in at like 6 a.m. from Washington State. So I'm up at, oh God, awful, to get out to the airport to pick them up. And on the way back, we're going to go back to our house to kind of, before we spent the day kind of doing stuff together. We stop somewhere and I tell them that I was trans. So this is the first people, I told outside of my ex. And they had some questions because they didn't really fully understand it, but they've been the most amazingly, wonderfully supportive, awesome people in as far as that goes. And so we had a really wonderful day, kind of talking about that sort of stuff. Friday comes around, we're supposed to be going up to Duluth, but we have to go to a funeral in the morning for my some family member of my ex's. Mm-hmm. So we put on the clothes to go to the funeral home for the thing. We do the thing. We're about to leave to hit the road, and I go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and I just look in the stands. I can't do this anymore. And literally, we went out to the car. We drove around the back of the funeral home. She changed into her attire. I changed into, out of men's stuff for the last time, and we hit the road. So I spent my first days full time up in Duluth, Minnesota, and just enjoying a wonderful weekend of not being misgendered. So,
oh, that's wonderful. So you were able to kind of just slip right into it, huh?
Yeah, Yeah. Well, it's really kind of interesting because the years leading up to that, it had kind of become a joke that whenever my ex and I would go shopping, we would count how many times I was misgendered as female while we were out. Because it became so, like, it was literally this running joke with us because it was, I mean, back in the late 80s, early 90s, I grew my hair out and it was down to my waist, and I had very long hair. I always wore it in some sort of feminine fashion. And, so it was easy to be gendered female. I always kept really good care of my hair. I wore, headbands and barrettes and all kinds of stuff. And it was just, for a very long time, people were always wondering what gender I was. So
that part was easy then. Was there anybody that was particularly difficult for you to come out to?
Well, the one that had the worst reaction was my mom, who felt completely blindsided. She didn't catch, and it's like, it was one of those things where I think she just felt like the presentation that, it's like, I'm going to take advantage of looking like some sort of hippie guy with long hair. And that's what she fell with, into, her beliefs. Mm-hmm. And, it's like, I don't blame her for that. But she took a little while for processing, but she's come around and has been really, really, really wonderful.
That's great. It's great to hear.
It's just been really sad with COVID and stuff. It's been very difficult to actually get to see her. She's out in Washington State with my youngest brother and his family, and so it hasn't been easy to get out there. We did get to see her briefly last summer when we went back to Minneapolis for a little bit, and she was there at the same time. So it's like, all right, we get to see each other. So that was kind of nice.
That's great. Did you have anybody during that time that accepted you that you weren't expecting to, or accepted you in a way that you weren't expecting?
It was kind of interesting. It was like the friends of mine, because, I've been involved in publishing and the science fiction, fantasy, horror field for decades. And largely it's a lot of liberal people, but there are a good number of conservatives in that world. And I was actually very surprised at the support I got from people I would consider conservatives.
Mm-hmm. I think most of our challenge comes from the people that don't know or know of the fact that they know or have interacted with trans people. Because, I've sort of seen the same thing. Like, the good people are good regardless of political leanings.
Right. So that was always nice.
Yeah. What was your experience in trying to find community to begin with? You seem like you had that sort of found a space a bit with the punk scene and all of that, but identifying as trans, was it different for you then? And did you seek out in any ways community to find other people to talk to and kind of talk through things? And what was that early experience for you?
Well, it wasn't just the punk scene that I was kind of around too. There was also the science fiction fantasy scene, which was always accepting to people that were different, which was, and that was where a large chunk of my friends' social groups was within that world. So it was like, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, you're still, you. And so those people are always wonderful to be around. As far as community in the trans sphere goes, there was a group in Minnesota that had started up shortly before I transitioned called the Minnesota Transgender Alliance. And there was a group started by trans people, specifically for trans people, as a um, my brain is a kind of a group therapy sort of thing, but their twist on it was that they kind of drove their meetings as topic based. So it was, instead of everybody just kind of bitching and moaning about how miserable their life is, it was like, let's talk about this particular aspect of, trans care, trans, whatever. So we would have, somebody might tell their life story to the group. I did that at least once. We have lawyers come in and talk about, trans, legal aspects of being trans and what you can do to help, battle insurance companies, and it was, we were all, focused on that and things that affected us as trans people, as opposed to just kind of randomly venting. So it was like, I really liked that aspect because I didn't want to just go around and hear sob stories.
Yeah.
I wanted something that was kind of uplifting, and I met some really wonderful people to which I'm still involved with. We still log into those meetings since everything went virtual with COVID. They've kept some of those meetings virtual. And it's been really nice getting to maintain relationships with people back in Minnesota through that, and made some really, really wonderful friends, including Justice Renee. I think that's where I first met her.
Mm-hmm. And how we got introduced, so that's great. What are some of the, it sounds like that your transition was fairly smooth. Like, it became pretty obvious and you were able to move into it quickly. Were there any key fears that you had as you moved into that phase? And how did you overcome any of those?
Well, there's always the fear of rejection. There was when I sat down to talk to my ex, it's like, yeah, is she going to throw me out right now? What's going to happen here? What's going to happen when I talk to the people at work? What's going to happen when I come out to the world at large? Most of those things went off without a hitch. I was very, I was very fortunate as far as that goes. But there always had that fear of rejection because, I've been very fortunate in my life where I've walked from one job to another without trying. So the prospect of losing a job and then trying to find one while being a trans person was kind of terrifying. So I'm glad, I was able to hold on to that job for 5 years or so before I ended up leaving that and moving here to Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's my own sense of fears of, excuse me, the unknown that always gets in my way and always has. It's. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome always in that mix.
Yeah, that's one of the key things that I've found and has been one of my biggest struggles in accepting myself is, you spend your whole life feeling like, okay, I don't fit into this box. This isn't right for me. I'm not what they assigned me at birth. So I need to transition. And you go through and you transition, and it's just like, for me, transitioning really late in life, not being socialized female, stepping into the female role, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like, a fish out of water completely over here. So it's not like I feel good about myself, but I don't feel like I fit into what I envision. And some of the things that you try to do, like your walk, your voice, mannerisms, and some of those things, you still see the guy stuff hanging on, and it's really hard to get into the other ones, and it just feels so awkward at first.
It does. But at a certain point, you just say, screw it. I just need to be the best me I can. And
But I also feel that there's a point where you just kind of, it's too exhausting to worry about it all the time. You just have to get back to living. And then
Exactly.
at some point you realize, like, oh, you know what? It doesn't feel as awkward for me anymore to walk with my hips or to, do whatever, talk with my hands, sort of a thing.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. It
Let's
is
get
true.
into the sort of deeper questions here. First off, our real ethereal one. What does transition mean for you?
Oh boy. What does it mean to me? I think it's to me it was just leaving that sort of disguise of pretending to be something I wasn't behind.
Mhm.
It's just being able to fully just be this person that I've always been, and so it was a transition away from what people were expecting of me and just leaving that behind and just fully embracing all of those aspects that so so poorly hid over the years.
Well, I love that sentiment, not the transition to, but the transition away, leaving
Yeah.
those sort of things behind. I love that.
Yeah, it's like it's like I never fit in the male world.
Hmm.
There was just never a place for me there, and I was happy to leave that behind.
Yes. So what do you feel you've been able to accomplish in your life because of the fact that you transitioned?
The one thing that I keep coming around to that transition gave me was friendships, and I could never delve into that pre-transition. It was always kind of these superficial relationships, and it wasn't until I transitioned where I could actually make meaningful connections to other people. And that is that is the biggest, I think, the biggest thing that I've gotten out of it to this point is that the comfort being with people and being able to open myself up and being vulnerable and communicating with people that I have was never feasible for me to do prior.
What do you feel is your favorite thing that you've learned either about yourself or the world around us, since you've transitioned?
Hmm. I should have read up on these questions. um, know that the world it can be extremely awesome, and that there is so much diversity of experience and people out there that it is just amazing to embrace it and learn from other people and just experience the world. That's that is just I don't know. It's like everything's turned up in intensity and wonderfulness. Yeah, I always described my pre-transition view of the world as I was this little thing inside this body, looking out the windows of my eyes at the world. And when I actually transitioned, that little being filled up the body and got to experience it all.
Hmm. As we wrap up this section,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for young or closeted trans folks out there?
That venturing out in the world, although it can be scary, being yourself is more positive and affirming than hiding. Just it can be scary to venture out there, and depending on where you are, it may not be safe. But there's so much of the world out there that is amazing, and don't miss it.
Well, and yeah, going back to that point, I think that once you accept yourself and can be yourself in the world, you find that confidence and can just engage in the world in a new way and a more authentic and deeper way. And so that just opens up so many possibilities for everything.
It
And
does, yes.
it's really helpful.
It's,
All right. Well, Michaela Waltz, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. We really appreciated having you here.
it's a pleasure.